Hi, okay, so this is my final for my art history class from Megan McClellan's art history class, and I'm just going to do an overview of the art pieces I chose. There's like my personal reflection, their statement of significance, and then I'm going to present shortly my little interpretations of each. And those will vary from like realistic reinterpretations or some that are a little bit more abstract in theory. So the first is Venus of Willendorf, or the Nude Woman. We're trying to readjust my little art wall. Yes, okay. So Venus of Willendorf, for like the personal reflection part of things. Whenever she was first presented in class, I thought she was really interesting, especially because it was a Paleolithic period, and up until this point we hadn't really seen many artworks crafted. I think the only one was like human with a cat head, and the fact that these were mass produced the way that they were was really interesting, and I think it really speaks to how much that they struggled health-wise, that they were creating totems of fertility that they could carry around and keep with them to encourage not only fertility but also like the health of themselves and their children. And the fact that they were featureless, so that they weren't any one specific woman, was also really interesting, I guess, but it was more so that it could be any of the women, and I think, like, considering that they were struggling so much, that it was a really sweet thing also. And so for my statement of significance, I pulled a lot from our textbook. And so my statement of significance for the Nude Woman is: the anatomical exaggerations in this tiny figurine from Willendorf are typical of Paleolithic representations of women whose childbearing capabilities ensured the survival of the species. And for my recreation, I'm going to kind of self-censor a little bit because the internet's weird. But these are my little keychain figurines that I made. And I made keychains because they were figures that would have been carried with the women at the time. And for like a modern take on that, I was like, okay, well, keychains. But I kept the figure itself pretty much the same. I added a little bit of color, my own little personal flair. Their heads are clovers, because that's something that we see around here a lot, especially in the springtime. And so it's kind of like a fertility thing, like in my head, because, you know, they're highly abundant and they come out during the springtime. And then I gave them body hair, but their body hair is green and it's got flowers on them to kind of really drive home that idea of like fertility and reproduction. And again, it's like very springtime. And one of them, just because I didn't want them to both be like the exact same, I've got this kind of like painted like Easter egg nature, as my roommate put it whenever I was putting it together. And so yeah, that's Venus of Willendorf. My second piece of art, there's going to be 12 of these. This is, yeah, okay, there's 12 of them. So it might get a little redundant. I'm going to do my best to like follow everything. The next one is Recreation of a Human Skull from Jericho. And this is moving into Neolithic period. I thought it was a really touching concept that they would remove their loved ones' skulls and recreate them to look like them so that they always had them around, especially considering it's not a highly skilled period of art history. And so this was just it was just such a sweet and kind of tragic concept that they would want to keep people around like that. And it really reminded me of a lot of modern day death celebrations, like Day of the Dead, for example, how people will put up photos of their loved ones so when their spirits come, so their spirits can come to visit. And I think these skulls acted very similarly for the people of Jericho, because they were meant to kind of like venerate their ancestors. And so for the statement of significance, Neolithic Jericho farmers removed the skulls of their dead before burial, modeled them with plaster, and inlaid the eyes to create lifelike portraits of their ancestors, whom they may have worshipped. And for my recreation, obviously I don't have an actual skull that I pulled from somebody, so instead of like going that extra step of, you know, decorating an actual skull as a person, I went the more Day of the Dead route. And so I have not an actual skull. I sculpted a skull, and I kind of decorated it in styles common for Day of the Dead. And I still have those inlaid eyes because that was an important part of the actual recreation, was like you need the eyes to be able to see a person. But I went really bright and colorful with it, and I chose colors that kind of were celebratory, not necessarily like sad and reflective. And I've got marigolds here because those kind of like represent the dead. And I've got shapes and patterns that were really reminiscent of Day of the Dead markings. And then kind of jumping across time, it's Stonehenge. Stonehenge, I was really excited to see in class. I'm gonna hold you down here more. Yeah! Word. Okay. Stonehenge, I was really excited whenever we started talking about it in class, because I already kind of knew that it was a place of high spiritual importance from like modern movies such as Brave, which I really liked that movie. And in that movie, it was really interesting, like after learning about Stonehenge, how much, I guess, spiritual accuracy was put into that movie, because Stonehenge was this place that people would travel to kind of celebrate and track astrological movement. And obviously, you know, the stones weren't from that specific area, like they were brought in, which at the time is like, what? How? I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not that hard, but like obviously they figured out a way to do it. And then the keystone being a completely different stone entirely was really, really interesting. And the fact that it came from miles away in Wales, I was like, wow. The amount of dedication and the way it must have functioned for early pagans, because it was an astrological site that followed along with the cycle of the sun. And it was really interesting to see such a large monument to early paganism, especially in an area that would later become highly Christianized isn't a word, but like a lot of the paganism in the area would be wiped out by Christianity that would have been later introduced into the region. But the fact that it still stands is just, I think, really interesting, and an actual testament to just how highly spiritual the place was. Stonehenge's circles of trilithons functioned as an astronomical observatory within a larger ritual complex. The sun rises over its heel stone at the summer solstice. Some of the megaliths weigh 50 tons. So it's a structure of different kinds of stones that are organized in such a specific way, and it's a place of ceremony, and kind of worship in a way to the unnatural world, which is like really cool. And for my recreation, I'm out of order again. Oh no! I'm not promising full timeline accuracy, okay? But for my recreation, I really tapped into the astrological aspect of Stonehenge, and I have the keystone here, and it's white and different than the rest of these, which is really accurate to how it actually looks too. And I have it set at night for because specifically it's the astrological cycles. And I really wanted, on a personal artistic note, I really wanted to play with values and lighting. And I think I did a really good job with that in this specific piece. And I feel like it's kind of fun and abstract, and it really shows how, I guess how Stonehenge is a testament to time, because it's still standing all of these years later, despite so much that has happened in that area. And so the next piece is the White Temple of Sumer. And that was one of the first, well, kind of one of the first architectural sites that we really talked about. And it was really, really interesting to see that in an art history class. I always knew there was a correlation between architecture and art. But I didn't have a really good appreciation for architecture as art until this class, because it really did say a lot about the way art was integrated into daily life, which isn't really something that we see nowadays. I mean, like, I can talk about modern examples of art integrated into life, but not to the same degree that architecture way back when had it. I mean, this was like the first civilization, essentially, and every aspect of this had some kind of like important ceremonial or spiritual or religious tie, and it was really reflective also of the art that they made. So like the vases and the like the way the vases flowed, the temple also flowed. And I really liked the idea that they were made in the place of their gods, because they believed that their gods slept within those mountains, which will tie into my recreation. Excuse me. For my statement of significance, the White Temple of Sumer was made out of mud bricks, and it was a place where it was a government building as well as a religious building. So the government happenings took place within the bottom part, the more pyramid part of the building, and then there was a temple that rested at the top. And the White Temple was thought to be to the sky god Anu, and it was kind of a precursor for other forms of temples, so ziggurats and later the Egyptian pyramids. And so for my recreation, I have a mountain goddess cradling the temple, and I really wanted it to be clear how the temple would have been carved from a mountain. And I thought it was also kind of a sweet take on how much that they loved and trusted their gods, and how their gods took care of them also, but also taking into the spiritual context. Like, I only kept her interaction with the top, the temple, because that's where they were thought to interact, was up there at that temple. Page flip, and then we're gonna bounce pretty far, because just as the White Temple was kind of like the precursor to pyramids, we're now in 4th Dynasty Egypt. And this was another instance of architecture and art coming together, but I think this was a greater emphasis of scientific and mathematical progress that humanity had made, because first of all, these are incredibly large monuments, and their positioning and all of the mathematical aspects of them are so specifically tied to the sun and their spiritual ideas. And even like the shapes, they were meant to represent their sun god, and how they're meant to travel up to the heavens after they die. And so the like lasting remainders. I mean, the pyramids of Giza are still considered like part of the, I think, 7 world wonders, and I think the fact that so many of these buildings still remain is not only a testament to their structural integrity, but also just how much care was put into building them. Because I don't think anything built in modern times would probably withstand the same amount of weathering and war that happens in these areas that these did. And even though, there were protections placed on them, like internationally speaking, there was still a long period of time where they weren't internationally protected like they are now. And it's just, I'm really just in awe of the structural integrity and the fact that these places of worship, like the White Temple and the pyramids of Giza and Stonehenge, are still standing the way that they are. And it also it's kind of bittersweet because it's really amazing that they're still standing, but there are many places like in Rome and Greece that aren't. Even though, there's still a lot that are, but they weren't as highly prosecuted. The earlier ones weren't as highly prosecuted as, paganism in these areas were, as, we've touched on very recently. So for my statement of significance, because we know I can yap, the 3 pyramids of Giza took the shape of the Benben, the emblem of the sun god Ra. The sun's rays were the ramp that the Egyptian kings used to ascend to the heavens after their death and rebirth. And for my recreation, it's very simple. Just the pyramid, and the golden part at the top is within the Eye of Ra, with that little sun rays, and it's like, choir singing, wah. But I did use gold to help, actual gold paint to help sell that effect. And it's mirrored, but I looked up and did research into what the actual Eye of Ra looked like, because it was kind of considered that these were a way for the gods to also kind of watch over the people. And then kind of moving south a little bit, we're now in Crete at Knossos. And this one was really, really fun because a lot of the structure reminded me of, I'm forgetting the name, but the kind of fortress of when people started when humanity started actually settling down, and how a lot of the entrances are at the top versus in the sides, and how it's sprawling and labyrinthine. And it wasn't just a place where one family was meant to live. This was a residential and ceremonial place, where the court would reside and high nobles would reside, but also I'm sure the slaves at the time would also have quarters there, and it was just meant to be this large house for all of these officials. And it was beautiful. It was actually stunning. My favorite part was the skylights where rain could come in and be collected, so that there wasn't a whole need to go outside of this structure to get what they needed. And for my statement of significance for this specific architectural work, it's the Palace of King Minos of Crete, and it's a large court structure that also was residential. And for my recreation, I actually did one of these pools within these, one of these skylight pools, and I've got 2 Minoan women collecting water, and I've got some sun rays coming down and reflecting in the water and the pillars, with little bits of greenery to help spruce up the image a little bit. Yeah. And then we move on. Okay, we're actually not moving on. We're staying in Knossos for a little bit, because one of my favorite pieces of actual artwork were the frescoes within Knossos. So we've had a long period of architectural emphasis, but now we're like actually moving on to the more art side of everything. And so the frescoes of Knossos, actually the Minoan woman, and I've ripped it here to kind of emulate the crack where it was pulled off. I'll get to that. Oh, I'm jumping ahead. Oh my goodness. I really love wall paintings, especially frescoes, and those are something that kind of stayed in the Mediterranean area for centuries, and they took on different styles and attempts. And I know technically that those aren't classified as frescoes, but the style of painting on walls, while not like unique to this specific area, because again, like previous, like the cave paintings from like early civilization, I think it's really interesting how this is one of those things that have carried on from like throughout history. And the style itself is very specific. It is representative of like Egyptian styles, because it's the side profile, and like early Mesopotamian art also. So we've got like the Mesopotamian influence, and then later we see it, or I guess not later, because we did touch on Egypt, so like also like an Egyptian influence too, which leads me to my statement of significance, where La Parisienne, or the Minoan woman, was a part of one of the frescoes at the Palace of Knossos, where stylistically it's very reminiscent of Mesopotamian and Egyptian styles, with that side profile and the large eye and being highly stylized versus more naturalistic. My recreation, I actually went the more realistic route. I used a lot of like similar colors and style, like structures, like this rip to emulate where it fell off the wall. But like I wanted to kind of bring her to life, not just an item on the wall. And she was possibly a priestess or a goddess, and so I wanted to take a lot of care in recreating her. And she actually was the inspiration, like clothing styles and hairstyle wise, for my ladies, for my Knossos reinterpretation. And these were all sized to fit within an actual notebook. So I'll probably like physically put these down on paper at some point. But for the sake of this final project, we've got these little paintings. Moving on, we have the Etruscan sarcophagus. I know whenever it was first introduced to class, I was like, ooh, oh my gosh, because it is particularly stunning. Like, we're starting to see like a movement towards more naturalistic stylings and renderings, and the Etruscans had such a very specific style. But the thing that about this specifically that touched me was it wasn't a sarcophagus for two people. It was meant for the husband, but his wife is so prominently featured. And the fact that around this time, women weren't considered equal to men in this way. And even like in Egypt, there was a lot of like family sculptures, but the women weren't, like, family wasn't as big of a deal. The women weren't really considered as important, even though a lot of times they were related. Inbreeding, am I right? But this particular sarcophagus was really beautiful, and the emotion behind it like really touched me, especially because I'm a bit of a romantic, and so seeing this, I was just like, wow, he really loved his wife, and he wants to be remembered that way for loving his wife. And the fact that the Etruscans didn't care about that separation as much, that they did value each other as equals or close to it, was just really sweet to see and really touching. And for the statement of significance, it's a very Etruscan style of sarcophagi. Yeah, we're going to go with that. It's very Etruscan in its stylization with a lot of emphasis on the upper half and also emphatic gestures. And that was something I tried to like really take into account whenever I did my recreation. I like taking statues and bringing them to life in these artworks. I think it's a lot of fun. But I kind of thought about like what they might have looked like as actual people, taking in account like regionally where it was located. And then I also used colors really similar to the bronze that it was cast in. And I just kind of, because it looked like she was, talking about something and he was kind of looking down and listening to her. And I kind of wanted to have a more intimate approach to what their relationship kind of might have looked like. And so this is my recreation. And now we're reaching a more personal stylization of these artworks. I definitely try to jump them more into modern times as far as recreations look, because I really wanted to start experimenting with, well, what would the modern equivalent be? And so our next piece is the man standing with his ancestral busts, which I thought was very interesting. Whenever I started learning about it, because I was like, oh, that, like, in theory it's sweet, like, look at the people who came before me, and look how similar that we are. And I thought it was, like, another one of those things where, like, family is highly prized and celebrated, which is very different than kind of, like, previous ideas of what family looked like. Not for this region, just, like, in art history generally, like, the Egyptians didn't really, like, the king and father was the only one that really mattered. And this is still, like, very patriarchal, but we've reached a point where culturally family is something that can be celebrated, but it's still very prideful, especially for men. And this is very, like, specific, like, his grandfather and his father. And so, as a feminist, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I was like, oh, okay. But also you have to, like, consider the cultural context of what's happening here. And so for my statement of significance, they are marble busts depicting a man posing with his it's a marble statue of a man posing with the busts of his grandfather and his father, and it's supposed to have an emphasis on the patriarchal genealogy and how much of a cultural, like, emphasis that they had on it. For my recreation, I got really fun with it. So I actually have me posing with pictures of my mom and my grandmother, in kind of a similar way that he's posing with the busts of his family members. So I actually did photographs kind of like from their times. So, like, my mom, she was a 80s, 90s kid, so I have her in a little Polaroid. And then for my grandma, she's a bit older, so I've got, like, an actual portraiture. And I have me standing in the middle in one of my favorite outfits. And I really liked taking this spin of, like, this emphasis on I'm a man and these are the men who came before me, and being like, these are the women who came before me. And it's on my maternal side, so this is my mom's mother and this is my mother. And I had a lot of fun with this, making it kind of abstract and really pretty and kind of in my style. And yeah, I think that's what I have to say about that. My next one, so we're talking about, like, the gardenscapes, and I'm focusing on the second style specifically, because, again, I love wall art, and this is another example of how it kind of modernized and how it continues to carry out from the cave paintings of, like, Paleolithic times all the way to this period of Rome where it's like really sophisticated and art has really popped off at this point, and it's a whole thing. And every time I see wall art, all I can think of is, wow, humans really don't change that much, do they? Like, sure, the rendering gets a lot better, especially because I chose the gardenscape picture window at Livia's villa. And this piece specifically was really beautiful. Like, we looked at a lot of examples of these kind of wall paintings, but I really liked this one because of how naturey it was. It was really beautiful to see, and I loved the fruit trees in the back and the use of perspective to kind of make it look like it expanded out from the room, and how they were wanting to bring nature inside. And it was so pretty and so well done, which leads me to my statement of significance. It's a second style picture window at Livia's villa, and the artist had used, I forget the word, but for his perspective, he had made the things further away smaller so that you could really get this feeling of depth in the room. And for my recreation, so the room itself, like in the images, were kind of empty because they're on display. And for the sake of emphasis on the artwork of the walls, I did sky, like the sky, as if it was surrounded in the room, because that's a mural I've always wanted to do, and I thought this was a really fun way to play with that. And it's kind of like a picture window, and I was like, okay, well, wouldn't it be cool if it was like in the sky? And I thought that'd be a fun novelty. And then I did gold at the top because a lot of the second style wall art had like a trim around the like topmost edge. And so we've got just a really simple cloud room with like nothing. I put a floor in, but there's nothing like filling the space because I wanted the emphasis to be on the wall. Second to last piece, when talking about art and how it evolved, we had finally like ended off where we did in class, talking about like depictions of Christ and iconography. And something that really caught my attention was, the most popular form of iconography, which was the depiction of Christ's blessing. And when discussing this in class, we talked about how one side showed his more divine side, his like youthful side, and the other side was a little bit more worn down and older, to show that human side. And so we have this moment of duality. And also one of the first, whenever I was doing research on my own about art history, when I was visiting museums, one of the first things I noticed was the gold halos. And I was really excited, like, to be confirmed right whenever I had this, like, idea that, it represents, like, holiness. And in my head, it was always kind of like, like, the sun and that aspect of divinity coming from above, because God's always, like, pictured from above. And so I was really proud of myself for being able to recognize that, and then being able to talk about that in class as like an actual confirmation. And then this piece specifically, whenever like interacting with items of Christianity, I mean, it's all over the place. It might have changed slightly, but even in modern churches and modern depictions, like, it is still a very blatant symbol of just holiness. And so for my statement, oh my goodness, I'm out of order again. Whoopsies. But for my statement of significance, it was just talking about, it's an icon for worship that was kind of mass produced so that people could carry it around. It's portable, of Christ giving his blessing. And it was kind of a cultural controversy to have one, because some people didn't agree with having an image to worship because of the ideas of Christianity at large, talking about not having idols. of what you worship to. Me personally, I think it does no harm. I think it's a nice reminder. And so whenever talking about my recreation, once again, like I said, like we're going a more me-specific route, and I really liked the half and half aspect of it. And so whenever I was considering it, I am currently involved with the school's production of These Shining Lives, which was about the Radium Girls, and kind of how these women were such an important part of human history, and how the things that happened to them due to the radium factories like really impacted how life changed industrially and like within the workspace for not just women but everyone, because of like workers' compensation and emphasis on safe working environments. And so because of all of these things, I thought taking this traditional iconography of Christ, and this isn't to say like consider her like godlike necessarily, but I really wanted to touch on like the ideas of duality. And for this piece, I actually tried to imitate 1920s like advert styles, because Art Nouveau heavily utilizes a lot of gold leaf and these geometric shapes, which was another reason I chose this specific imaging. And I think it'll make a little bit more sense once you actually see it. So again, it's inverted, but this is kind of like the side of her that I guess would, in this context, be like the divinity, or, you know, like her aging and the impact the radium's having on her body. And I have the clock in this hand to kind of replace the Bible. And I've got, you know, that halo of gold. Yeah, I love that gold paint. And then on this side, it's just her and interacting with, I've got her hand up kind of like, you know, Christ's blessing hand, and in her hand she's got the paintbrush. And I just kind of wanted to repurpose that very common iconography towards something that I'm actively learning about, and also like considering the depictions and the importance behind said depictions. I wanted to kind of reimagine what that would look like. It might be blasphemy, but honestly, art is important and up for reinterpretation, and I don't think I'm in the wrong for wanting to do something like this. Our final piece, 12 down, 40 minutes later. Our final piece is, takes a little bit of explanation. I keep jumping ahead to being like, look at my recreation. But no, I wanted to talk about the specific, the carving of the woman still sacrificing to the Roman gods, because it was an image that I immediately recognized as like the classical style. And it was really interesting how reminiscent of the actual statues that it looked. But then, like, learning about the context behind it, I was like, wow, like, we're at this point where Christianity is incredibly widespread, but there are people who are still, it went from Christians being persecuted for their religious beliefs to the Romans, who still believed in their old gods, being persecuted for their beliefs. And I really thought about how much that really hasn't changed in modern day, because modern pagans who still like worship the old gods, they don't really have that place anymore. So it's like Christianity and paganism did a 180. It went from being that Christianity was something persecuted and practiced in secret to now being a thing where there's churches around every corner, and it's the most accepted form of religion. And paganism, specifically like Roman paganism in this context, it's no longer kind of recognized, and a lot of people, in a lot of times people are like, oh, you're delusional, that's not a thing, because Christianity is the only like accepted form, or like the Abrahamic religions are only like the accepted form of religion, especially within America. And so it's one of those things where I was really intrigued by how humanity really hasn't changed all that much, like with the wall paintings, or, you know, the way, like, our treatment of others. And it's one of those things where when you really consider, like, in the largest picture possible, how once we started coming together as people, like we did in this time period, we really stopped being kind, I suppose, about other people's differences. Not that I'm going to sit here and say, like, we were always the best about it, because, I mean, even the Sumerians, like, went to, like, encroached on people's territory and stuff, and enslaved people, and it was not good. But we finally reached a point of such global mixing that when it comes to things that are globally accepted, it really hasn't changed that much. Which leads me into my statement of significance, because this is 40 minutes already, and I tried to keep it under 30, but you know. So this is a woman still practicing the old gods, even though Theodosia made it like illegal in 391, and the artist is reflecting the very classical style of art still. For my recreation, I tapped into that kind of modern paganism sense, and I used a lot of the art motifs from that artwork and brought it into here. So we have the framing with the little decorations on the side, and I have that tree, and then the altar, and then the woman, and I kind of modernized this to a house and like a tree in someone's backyard, but I made her and the altar a color very similar to the way that the marble had aged over time, to kind of show how things didn't really change at all. Like, yes, the setting is different, and yes, she looks different, but her hair is still done up very similarly. She's wearing a cowl shirt that's really reminiscent of the dress that the woman is wearing, and how humanity still prevails, even though it can be different. And so that is a wrap on my final project for art history. I'm doing this really late at night, and I'm sorry for the kind of like informal set. But I really did enjoy this class, and I really, really loved getting to learn about all of these pieces and really deep diving into cultures that I've only ever had time to like topically learn about. And so it was a really great experience, and I can't wait to do it again in semester 2. I had to plug you in. Yay, okay, yes. Thank you, Dr. Megan, for a great semester.